My name is Catherine Mitchell, and for 28 years, I believed my family loved me equally. I was wrong about everything. Growing up in our sprawling colonial house in Greenwich, Connecticut, I thought the tension I felt was normal sibling rivalry. Our father, Robert Mitchell, had built Mitchell and Associates from a small accounting firm into one of the most prestigious financial consulting companies on the East Coast. Our mother, Eleanor, came from old Boston money, the kind of wealth that whispered rather than shouted, that valued tradition above all else. My sister Diana was 18 months younger than me, but you'd never know it from how our parents treated her. Where I was practical and driven, Diana was charming and manipulative. Where I studied late into the night to maintain my 4.0 GPA at Yale, Diana coasted through expensive prep schools on her personality and our father's donations. Where I dressed conservatively and focused on my pre-law studies, Diana knew exactly how to flutter her eyelashes and get whatever she wanted. The house itself reflected our family's contradictions. Built in 1987 when Dad's business really took off, it sat on 3 acres of manicured lawns in the most exclusive part of Greenwich. The kitchen had marble countertops imported from Italy, and the living room featured a fireplace large enough to roast a pig. Persian rugs worth more than most people's cars covered polished hardwood floors, and oil paintings by artists whose names I'd studied in art history classes lined the hallways. But for all its grandeur, the house never felt warm to me. It felt like a museum where emotions were kept carefully contained, where appearances mattered more than authenticity, where love was conditional on performance. Diana understood this dynamic instinctively, while I struggled against it my entire childhood. She learned early that tears could manipulate our father, that helplessness could mobilize our mother, that being the baby of the family meant being protected from consequences. I, meanwhile, was expected to be the responsible one, the achiever, the daughter who made our parents proud through accomplishments rather than neediness. The first real crack in our family foundation appeared during Thanksgiving of 2019. I was 26, fresh out of Columbia Law School, and working 80-hour weeks at a prestigious Manhattan firm. Diana was 24, had dropped out of 3 different colleges, and was living at home while supposedly finding herself through various expensive hobbies our parents funded. We were gathered around the dining room table, a mahogany monstrosity that seated 12 and had been in our mother's family for 4 generations. The crystal chandelier cast warm light over the holiday feast, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. Dad was carving the turkey with the same ceremony he performed every year, Mom was ensuring everyone's wine glass stayed full, and Diana was regaling us with stories from her latest attempt at becoming a yoga instructor. "I've been thinking about opening my own studio," Diana announced, twirling her blonde hair around her finger, a gesture that had been charming at 5 but looked ridiculous at 24. "There's this perfect space in Soho that would be absolutely divine." I nearly choked on my wine. Diana had been thinking about a lot of things over the years, becoming a fashion designer, starting an organic skincare line, launching a lifestyle blog, writing a novel. Each venture had cost our parents tens of thousands of dollars and lasted approximately 6 months. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," Mom cooed, refilling Diana's glass with the expensive Bordeaux Dad had been saving for special occasions. "How much would you need to get started?" "Well, the rent is only $8,000 a month, and then there's equipment, insurance, marketing." Diana rattled off numbers with the casual indifference of someone who'd never worked for money in her life. "I'm thinking maybe $150,000 to do it right." I set down my fork with more force than necessary. "Diana, didn't you just spend $50,000 on that jewelry design course that you quit after 2 months?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Diana's eyes filled with tears, those perfectly timed tears that had been her secret weapon since childhood. "Catherine, why are you always so mean to me?" she whispered, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "I'm trying to build something meaningful with my life, and you just tear me down." "I'm not tearing you down. I'm pointing out a pattern." "Girls," Dad interrupted, his voice carrying that warning tone I knew meant stop talking immediately. "This is Thanksgiving. Let's keep things pleasant." But Diana wasn't finished with her performance. She turned to our parents with those wide blue eyes brimming with tears. "I don't understand why Catherine is so jealous of me. Ever since we were little, she's resented any attention I get. Now she doesn't want you to support my dreams because she's bitter about her own choices. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Jealous? I was working 12-hour days at one of the most competitive law firms in New York, paying off my student loans, building a career that would make me financially independent. What exactly was I supposed to be jealous of? I'm not jealous, Diana. I'm practical. There's a difference. See? Diana's voice rose to that pitch that always made our mother nervous. She can't even admit it. She's always been jealous that I'm happier, that I'm not stressed all the time, that people actually enjoy being around me. Diana, that's enough, I said firmly, feeling my face flush with anger and embarrassment. Around the table, I could see our relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, watching this family drama unfold like it was dinner theater. Is it enough, Catherine? Diana stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Because I'm tired of walking on eggshells around your jealousy. I'm tired of you making me feel guilty for being loved. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the table at faces that suddenly seemed like strangers. My Aunt Patricia was studying her plate intently. My Uncle James was reaching for more wine. My cousin Mark was checking his phone. And my parents were looking at me like I'd just confirmed something they'd long suspected. Maybe, my mother said slowly, carefully, we should all take a moment to cool down. But the damage was done. Diana had planted the seed of an idea that would grow like cancer through our family, that I was jealous, bitter, resentful of my sister's happiness and our parents' love for her. It was a masterful manipulation because it contained just enough truth to be believable. I was stressed, I did work too much, I wasn't as naturally charming as Diana. What Diana knew, what she'd always known, was that jealousy was the one accusation that couldn't be defended against. Deny it, and you looked guilty. Ignore it, and people assumed it was true. Fight back, and you proved their point. Over the next few months, Diana's poisonous suggestions spread through our family like gossip at a country club. I started noticing the way conversations would stop when I entered a room, the way our mother would carefully edit stories about Diana's latest adventures, the way our father would look at me with a mixture of disappointment and pity. Catherine seemed so tense lately. I overheard Mom telling Dad one evening when I came home to pick up some documents I'd left in my old room. Diana thinks it's because she's jealous of the attention we give her. Maybe we should be more mindful of Catherine's feelings. Mindful of my feelings. As if my legitimate concerns about Diana's financial irresponsibility were just hurt feelings that needed to be managed carefully. The real turning point came in March 2020, just as the world was shutting down for COVID. Diana had predictably abandoned the yoga studio idea. The owner wanted first and last month's rent plus a security deposit up front, which made the venture feel too corporate for her artistic vision, and had instead become fascinated with real estate investment. It's the perfect time to buy, she explained to our parents during one of our now monthly family dinners. Prices are going to crash, and I could get in on the ground floor. There's this adorable townhouse in Brooklyn Heights that would be perfect for renovation and flipping. I laughed, actually laughed out loud, at the absurdity of Diana, who couldn't balance a checkbook, suddenly becoming a real estate mogul during a global pandemic. What's so funny? Diana asked, her voice sharp. You want to flip houses? Diana, you've never even lived independently. You don't know the first thing about real estate, construction, or business management. I've been studying. You've been watching HGTV, I interrupted. That's not the same thing. Diana's face crumpled, and I knew immediately that I'd walked into her trap. There she goes again, she whispered to our parents. Do you see? She can't stand the thought of me succeeding at something. Dad set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. Catherine, your sister is trying to share her excitement about a new venture, and you're being unnecessarily harsh. I'm being realistic. You're being jealous, Mom said quietly, and those 3 words hit me like a gunshot. Sweetheart, I know it's hard to see Diana exploring different paths when you've chosen such a structured, high-pressure career, but that doesn't give you the right to tear her down. I stared at my mother, this woman who had raised me, who had taught me the value of hard work and personal responsibility, and realized that Diana had successfully rewritten our family history. In the new version, I wasn't the responsible daughter who'd earned everything through merit. I was the bitter sister who couldn't stand to see Diana happy. "I'm not jealous," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "I'm concerned about fiscal responsibility." "No," Diana said, standing up from the table with renewed confidence. "You're jealous that Mom and Dad support my dreams. You're jealous that I'm not miserable like you are. You're jealous that I have the courage to take risks while you're stuck in some soulless corporate job that's turning you into a bitter person." Each word hit its mark with surgical precision. The worst part was that Diana wasn't entirely wrong. I was unhappy at the law firm, I did feel stuck sometimes, and I was frustrated by the lack of recognition I received for my achievements compared to the constant praise Diana got for simply existing. But jealousy? That implied that I wanted what Diana had: financial dependence, no real skills or accomplishments, a life built on manipulation and empty charm. The suggestion was both insulting and terrifying because it meant my family saw me as someone small and petty. "Maybe," Dad said carefully, "Catherine needs some time to think about how her attitude is affecting this family." And there it was. The moment my position in the family shifted permanently. I wasn't the accomplished daughter anymore, I was the problem that needed to be managed. Over the next 6 months, every family interaction became a minefield. Diana grew bolder in her manipulations, knowing she had our parents' support. She would make increasingly outrageous requests for money, and when I expressed any concern, it was immediately labeled as jealousy. "Catherine's just upset because she has to work for her money," Diana would say with a sympathetic smile, "while you guys help me because you love me." The real estate venture, like all of Diana's projects, fizzled out after a few months when she realized it involved actual work. But by then, she'd already moved on to her next scheme, starting a nonprofit organization focused on empowering young women to follow their dreams. "It's perfect for me," she gushed during a family barbecue at our house. "I could really make a difference in the world while building something meaningful." "What's your experience with nonprofit management?" I asked, genuinely curious about how she planned to run an organization when she'd never successfully completed any project. "Experience isn't everything, Catherine," Mom said before Diana could answer. "Sometimes passion and heart matter more than credentials." I felt like I was losing my mind. Since when did our mother, who had always valued education and achievement, believe that passion trumped competence? Since when did wanting accountability become a character flaw? Besides, Diana added sweetly, "I'll learn as I go. That's what makes life an adventure, right? Not everyone needs to have their whole life planned out like some people." She gave me a pointed look. The nonprofit idea required initial funding of $200,000. Our parents didn't even blink. "We believe in Diana's vision," Dad explained when I asked if they'd considered requiring a business plan or any accountability measures. "She has a gift for inspiring people." "What people has she inspired?" I asked. "Name one person whose life Diana has meaningfully improved." The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Dad's face darkened with an expression I'd never seen directed at me before. "Catherine, your sister doesn't need to justify her dreams to you. The fact that you can't see her potential says more about you than it does about her." That night, I lay in my Manhattan apartment staring at the ceiling and wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I'd played by every rule, met every expectation, achieved everything our parents had said they wanted for their daughters. I was financially independent, professionally successful, and completely miserable because my own family saw me as the villain in their story. But I was about to discover that Diana's manipulation had only just begun, and the real betrayal was still coming. 3 months later, I learned that my parents were rewriting their will. The discovery happened by accident, the way most devastating truths do. I was at my childhood home helping Mom organize old photo albums when Dad's lawyer called. Mom stepped into the kitchen to take the call, and I continued sorting through decades of family memories spread across the dining room table. "Yes, we want to make sure the amendments are ironclad," I heard Mom saying in the low, serious tone she used for important business. "We can't have any challenges to our wishes." "Amendments to what?" I found myself listening more intently, guilt mixing with curiosity as I pretended to focus on a photo album from our childhood vacation to Martha's Vineyard. The primary beneficiary should remain Diana, with the trust structured exactly as we discussed, Mom continued. And you're certain the conditions we've outlined are legally enforceable? My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Primary beneficiary. Trust. Conditions. These weren't casual estate planning updates. This sounded like a complete restructuring of their will with Diana as the central focus. Catherine has made it clear through her behavior that she doesn't support this family's values, Mom was saying, her voice carrying across the large house in a way that made me feel like an intruder in my own childhood home. We need to protect Diana from any future resentment or legal challenges. I set down the photo album with trembling hands. Through her behavior. Protect Diana from me. The poisonous seed Diana had planted was bearing fruit in ways I'd never imagined possible. No, Catherine won't be completely excluded, Mom said after a pause. We're not heartless. She'll receive a modest inheritance, enough to know she was remembered, but not enough to enable any vindictive behavior. Modest inheritance. 28 years of being the responsible daughter, the one who'd never asked for anything, who'd paid her own way through law school, who'd built a career based on merit rather than manipulation, and I was getting a modest inheritance to ensure I wasn't forgotten entirely. Diana will have full control of the Mitchell and Associates succession and the family trust, Mom continued. She understands the importance of family legacy in a way that Catherine has made her priorities clear. The conversation lasted another 10 minutes, covering details about trustee appointments, succession planning for Dad's business, and various legal mechanisms designed to ensure Diana's inheritance was protected from challenges. By the time Mom hung up, I felt like I'd been hollowed out with a spoon. When she returned to the dining room, Mom found me staring at a photo from Diana's college graduation, the third college she'd attended after dropping out of the first two. That was such a proud day, Mom said, settling back into her chair with a nostalgic smile. Diana looked so beautiful, and she was so excited about her future possibilities. What about my law school graduation? I asked quietly, still looking at the photo. What about it? You said Diana's graduation was such a proud day. What about mine? Mom was quiet for a moment, arranging and rearranging the photos in front of her. Of course we were proud of your graduation too, sweetheart. But Diana's was different. She'd struggled so much, overcome so many challenges. Seeing her finally find her path was especially meaningful. Her path. Diana's path had led to a series of abandoned projects funded by our parents' money and a non-profit organization that existed only on paper. My path had led to a successful legal career and financial independence. But somehow, Diana's was the inspiring one. Mom, I said carefully, what did you mean when you told Dad's lawyer that I'd made my priorities clear? The color drained from her face, and I knew she'd realized I'd overheard the conversation. For a moment, I saw something flicker across her expression, guilt, maybe, or recognition of how wrong this all was. But then her features hardened into that familiar look of parental disappointment I'd been seeing more and more lately. Catherine, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about your attitude toward this family. And there it was. The conversation I'd been dreading but somehow always knew was coming. The conversation where my parents would explain why my sister deserved everything and I deserved condemnation for questioning it. My attitude? I repeated, setting down the photo album and giving her my full attention. Your jealousy toward Diana is poisoning every family interaction, Mom said, her voice taking on that clinical tone she used when discussing unpleasant but necessary topics. You can't stand to see her happy, you sabotage her confidence, and you make every gathering tense with your negativity. I've never sabotaged Diana's confidence. You dismiss every dream she shares, you question every project she's passionate about, and you make sarcastic comments about her lifestyle choices, Mom interrupted. Do you think we don't notice? Do you think it doesn't hurt her? I stared at my mother, this woman who had taught me to value honesty, accountability, and hard work, and realized she had completely rewritten reality to accommodate Diana's narrative. In her new version of our family history, my legitimate concerns about Diana's irresponsibility were character flaws, my achievements were evidence of a joyless personality, and my reluctance to enable Diana's financial dependence was proof of my jealousy. Mom, I love Diana, but I also think she needs to take responsibility for her choices. How is that jealousy? Because you can't be happy for her. When she talks about her dreams, your first instinct is to tear them down. When she shares her excitement about a new project, you immediately point out the flaws. When your father and I support her financially, you act like we're making a mistake. I act like you're enabling behavior that isn't helping her grow as a person, I said, feeling my voice rise despite my efforts to stay calm. Diana is 24 years old, Mom. She's never held a job for longer than 6 months, never finished a project she started, never lived independently. How is that something to celebrate? She's figuring out her path. Not everyone needs to have their life mapped out by age 12 like you did. I didn't have my life mapped out by 12. I just had goals and worked toward them. And look how that turned out, Mom said, her voice dripping with pity. You're 28 years old, working 80 hours a week at a job that makes you miserable, with no romantic relationships, no apparent joy in your life, and so much resentment toward your own sister that you can't bear to see her happiness. Each word hit like a physical blow. The worst part was that some of it was true. I was working too much, I wasn't happy at the firm, and I hadn't prioritized relationships. But the suggestion that these professional sacrifices made me a lesser person than Diana, who had achieved nothing except our parents' inexplicable devotion, was breathtaking in its cruelty. So you're changing your will because I work too hard? I asked. We're updating our estate planning to reflect our values and ensure our legacy is protected, Mom said stiffly. Diana understands the importance of family, the value of taking care of each other, the responsibility that comes with inherited wealth. She'll use our resources to build something meaningful, something that honors what your father and I have built. What has Diana ever built? Name one thing she's completed successfully. She's built relationships, Catherine. She's brought joy to our lives. She's reminded us that there's more to life than achievement and accumulation. I felt like Alice falling down the rabbit hole into a world where nothing made sense. Diana, who had cost our parents hundreds of thousands of dollars in failed ventures, was being rewarded for bringing joy. I, who had never asked for financial support and had built an independent career, was being punished for my achievements. What exactly am I inheriting in this new will? I asked. Mom shifted uncomfortably, rearranging the photos again. You'll receive a trust fund that will provide you with a comfortable annual income. Nothing extravagant, but enough to supplement your salary and ensure you're never in financial distress. How much? Catherine, the exact amount isn't. How much, Mom? She sighed. $50,000 a year for life. $50,000. The family business was worth approximately $12 million. The real estate holdings were worth another $8 million. The investment portfolio was worth at least $15 million. And I was getting $50,000 a year while Diana inherited everything else. And Diana gets the rest? Diana gets the responsibility of managing our legacy, yes. She understands that wealth is meant to be shared, to lift up others, to create opportunities for people to follow their dreams. It was a beautiful speech about noble intentions, delivered by a woman who was giving a proven spendthrift control of $35 million while relegating her responsible daughter to a modest allowance. Has Diana ever successfully managed any amount of money? I asked. She'll learn. She'll have advisors, trustees, legal counsel. She'll have advisors managing the money you're leaving her because she can't manage it herself, but she's the one who understands the responsibility of inherited wealth. Catherine, this conversation is exactly why we've made these decisions. Your first instinct is always to attack Diana, to undermine her, to focus on her perceived weaknesses rather than her strengths. What are her strengths, Mom? Specifically, what has Diana done that qualifies her to inherit and manage a $35 million estate? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Mom opened her mouth several times to answer, then closed it again. Finally, she said, Diana has a good heart. A good heart. $35 million in inheritance because Diana had a good heart. And I don't? You have other qualities, Catherine. You're smart, you're driven, you're accomplished. But accomplishment isn't everything. Diana reminds us to value kindness, family connection, the softer aspects of life that make existence meaningful. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab my mother by the shoulders and shake her until she remembered who I'd been before Diana's poison had corrupted her perception. I wanted to demand she name one example of Diana's kindness that hadn't cost our parents money or emotional energy. Instead, I stood up from the dining room table and began collecting the photo albums I'd been organizing. "Where are you going?" Mom asked. "Home. I think I've heard enough family history for one day." "Catherine, please don't leave like this. I know you're upset, but..." "I'm not upset, Mom. I'm enlightened." I tucked the last album under my arm and headed for the front door. For the first time, I completely understand where I stand in this family. You're always welcome here, sweetheart. This is your home. I turned back to look at her one last time, sitting among the scattered photographs of a family that had never really existed the way I'd remembered it. "No, Mom. This is Diana's home. I'm just a guest who's overstayed her welcome." During the drive back to Manhattan, I felt something shift inside me, a fundamental reorientation of my understanding of family, loyalty, and my own value. For 28 years, I believed that love was earned through behavior, that respect came from achievement, that family bonds were strengthened by mutual support and accountability. Diana had taught me that I was wrong about everything. Love, apparently, could be purchased through manipulation. Respect could be commanded through victimhood. And family bonds were strongest when they protected the weakest member from any consequences of their choices. But Diana had made one crucial mistake in her campaign to poison my parents against me. She'd assumed that being cut out of the inheritance would devastate me, that the threat of financial abandonment would force me to submit to her narrative and beg for forgiveness. She had no idea that losing their money was about to liberate me completely. 6 months after discovering my parents' plans to essentially disinherit me, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to build my own empire, and when I was finished, the Mitchell family name would belong to me in ways they couldn't imagine. The revelation about the will had initially felt like a devastating betrayal, but after the shock wore off, I realized Diana had accidentally given me the greatest gift possible, complete freedom from family obligations. I no longer had to pretend their opinions mattered, no longer had to moderate my ambitions to avoid making Diana feel inadequate, no longer had to balance my success against their expectations. I was free to become exactly who I was meant to be. The transformation began with my career. I'd been working at Morrison, Klein & Associates, a prestigious but soulless corporate law firm where I was one of 12 associates competing for 3 potential partnerships. The work was mind-numbing corporate compliance, the hours were brutal, and the partners treated associates like expensive furniture that occasionally provided legal opinions. But the firm had one significant advantage: they represented several high-net-worth individuals and family offices in estate planning and wealth management. During my 2 years there, I'd learned everything about how generational wealth was structured, protected, and transferred. I understood trust mechanisms, tax optimization strategies, succession planning for family businesses, and the legal frameworks that allowed wealthy families to maintain their dynasties across generations. More importantly, I'd identified the gaps in the market, services that wealthy clients desperately needed but couldn't find from traditional law firms or financial advisors. In December 2020, I made my move. I gave notice at Morrison, Klein & Associates and used my savings to rent a small office space in Midtown Manhattan. The sign on the door read, Mitchell Wealth Strategies, a name I'd chosen very deliberately. If my family thought the Mitchell name represented values I didn't share, I was going to redefine what that name meant in the financial world. My business model was elegantly simple. I would provide comprehensive wealth management services specifically designed for first-generation wealth creators, entrepreneurs, tech founders, entertainment industry professionals, and other successful individuals who had built substantial assets but lacked the generational knowledge of how to protect and transfer that wealth effectively. Unlike traditional estate planning attorneys who focused on tax minimization and legal compliance, I offered something much more valuable: strategic guidance on how to use wealth as a tool for creating lasting impact and generational significance. I helped clients structure their assets not just to avoid taxes, but to build legacies that would enhance their families and communities for decades. The first year was brutal. I was working 18-hour days, cold calling potential clients, speaking at industry conferences, and slowly building a reputation in New York's financial community. I lived on ramen noodles and coffee, slept on a futon in my studio apartment, and poured every dollar I earned back into growing the business. My family had no idea what I was doing. They assumed I was still grinding away at the corporate law firm, too bitter and jealous to maintain regular contact with them. Diana occasionally sent me cheerful text messages about her latest ventures. She'd abandoned the nonprofit idea in favor of becoming a wellness influencer, but I responded with polite, minimal replies that gave them no insight into my actual life. This invisibility was crucial to my strategy. I needed time to build something substantial before they realized what was happening. By the end of 2021, Mitchell Wealth Strategies had 15 clients with a combined net worth of approximately $40 million. Not enormous by Manhattan standards, but respectable for a one-person firm that had been operating for less than 2 years. More importantly, my clients were getting remarkable results from the strategies I developed, and word was beginning to spread through New York's tight-knit community of ultra-high net worth individuals. My breakthrough came in February 2022, when I was introduced to Marcus Chin, a tech entrepreneur who had sold his artificial intelligence company to Google for $650 million. Marcus was 34 years old, brilliant with technology, and completely overwhelmed by the complexity of managing his newfound wealth. "Every advisor I meet wants to sell me something," he told me during our first consultation in my small office overlooking Bryant Park. "Insurance policies, investment products, tax shelters that sound too complicated to be legal. I just want someone to help me figure out how to use this money responsibly." Marcus became not just a client, but a collaborator in developing what would become my signature service, integrated legacy planning that combined traditional wealth management with philanthropic strategy, family governance, and impact investing. Together, we created a framework that allowed him to grow his wealth while simultaneously funding initiatives that aligned with his values. The Marcus Chin engagement generated 3 referrals, which generated 7 more referrals, which generated 15 more referrals. By the end of 2022, I was managing wealth strategies for clients with a combined net worth of over $200 million, and I had hired 4 associates to help handle the growing workload. But the real transformation was happening in my reputation within New York's financial elite. I wasn't just another lawyer providing estate planning services. I was becoming known as the strategist who could help successful people turn their wealth into lasting influence. My clients weren't just protecting their assets, they were using those assets to reshape industries, fund breakthrough research, and create opportunities for others. The media attention started small, a mention in a Wall Street Journal article about innovative approaches to wealth management, a quote in a Forbes piece about next-generation estate planning. But by early 2023, I was being invited to speak at major industry conferences, and financial publications were regularly seeking my insights on trends in wealth management for high-net-worth individuals. That's when Diana noticed. "Catherine, I saw your name in that Forbes article about financial planning," she texted me in March 2023. "I had no idea you were doing so well. We should celebrate, maybe dinner this weekend?" For the first time in 2 years, Diana was reaching out to me with something that resembled genuine interest rather than obligatory family communication. I could practically feel her calculating the implications of my growing success and wondering how it might benefit her. I agreed to dinner, curious to see how she would position herself now that I was becoming a public figure in New York's financial world. We met at Le Bernardin, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. Diana arrived 20 minutes late, looking gorgeous in a way that required significant time and money to achieve. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup was professionally applied, and her designer dress probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Catherine, you look amazing," she gushed, giving me air kisses that didn't disturb her lipstick. "Success really suits you." I was wearing a tailored black suit that projected authority rather than fashion, minimal jewelry, and makeup that enhanced rather than transformed. The contrast between us was stark. Diana looked like someone who spent her days being beautiful, while I looked like someone who spent her days being important. Thank you, I said simply. You look lovely too. We ordered wine. Diana chose the most expensive Bordeaux on the menu without checking the price, and settled into the kind of conversation I hadn't had with my sister in years. For the first 30 minutes, Diana was charming, interested, and seemingly proud of my accomplishments. I always knew you'd be successful, she said, raising her wine glass in a toast. You're so smart and driven. It just took the world a little while to catch up. The praise felt hollow, but I accepted it graciously while studying her carefully. Diana was building toward something. I could see it in the way she kept steering the conversation toward my work, my clients, my future plans. Tell me about your business, she said, leaning forward with exaggerated interest. The article made it sound so sophisticated, but I didn't understand half the terminology. I gave her a simplified explanation of wealth management strategy, watching her face carefully as I described the scope and scale of what I'd built. Her eyes widened when I mentioned managing strategies for clients worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and I saw her mental calculator working to estimate what that meant for my own net worth. Catherine, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. You must be making serious money doing this. And there it was. The real reason for this sudden familial affection. I'm doing well, I said carefully. I'll bet. God, I can't even imagine what it must be like to have that kind of financial freedom. Diana sighed dramatically. I'm still figuring out my path, you know? The wellness influencing thing is going okay, but it's not exactly lucrative. How's the family nonprofit coming along? I asked, genuinely curious about what had happened to the $200,000 venture our parents had funded. Diana's face fell slightly. Oh, that. Well, it turned out to be much more complicated than I expected. The legal requirements, the paperwork, the accountability measures, it just wasn't aligned with my vision of helping people. Translation, it involved actual work and oversight, so she'd abandoned it. I'm sorry it didn't work out. It's fine. I'm focusing on more direct ways to make an impact now. Actually, that's part of why I wanted to talk to you. Diana's voice took on that familiar tone of practiced vulnerability. I've been thinking about everything that's happened between us over the past few years, and I feel terrible about how I've contributed to the tension in our family. I raised an eyebrow. This was new territory. Diana had never acknowledged any responsibility for family dysfunction. I think maybe I was intimidated by your success, she continued, and I might have said some things that made Mom and Dad worry about your attitude toward me. But now that I see how amazing you're doing, I realize I was just being insecure. It was a masterful performance, just enough accountability to seem sincere, but framed in a way that positioned her as the victim of her own insecurities rather than the architect of a deliberate manipulation campaign. I appreciate you saying that, I said neutrally. I want us to be close again, Catherine. I want our family to be united. And I think maybe there are ways we could work together, you know? Combine your business expertise with my people skills and creativity. And there was the real agenda. Diana had realized that I was building something valuable, and she wanted to position herself to benefit from it. What did you have in mind? Well, I've been thinking about maybe getting more involved in the financial world. Maybe I could work for your company. I could handle client relations, marketing, business development, all the interpersonal stuff that you probably don't have time for. I nearly laughed at the audacity. Diana, who had never held a real job or completed any significant project, wanted to join my company in a senior role because she was good with interpersonal stuff. That's an interesting idea, I said. What's your experience with financial services? I don't have direct experience, but I have natural abilities that could be really valuable. I'm great with people, I understand what wealthy clients want, and I could help make your company more approachable and relatable. What do you think wealthy clients want? Diana launched into a 5-minute monologue about luxury experiences, personal attention, and feeling valued for their success rather than judged for their privilege. It was clear she'd never actually interacted with serious money. Her understanding of wealth was based entirely on movies and social media. Real wealthy clients, I'd learned, wanted competence above all else. They wanted advisors who understood their complex needs, who could navigate sophisticated legal and financial structures, who could deliver results without drama or hand-holding. They didn't want to be made comfortable, they wanted to be made more successful. Those are interesting insights, I said diplomatically. Let me think about it and get back to you. Of course. Take your time. I'm just excited about the possibility of working together. Diana smiled brilliantly. It would be such a great way to rebuild our relationship while building something amazing together. As we finished dinner, I realized that Diana's approach to our reconciliation was exactly the same as her approach to everything else: identify someone else's success, position herself as essential to it, and extract maximum benefit with minimum effort. But this time, she'd miscalculated. She assumed that my success had made me more vulnerable to her manipulation, more eager for family approval, more willing to share what I'd built. Instead, my success had made me completely immune to her tactics. I now had something Diana couldn't take away, couldn't diminish, and couldn't redefine: a reputation built on merit, relationships based on mutual value, and financial independence that made family approval irrelevant. Over the following months, Diana escalated her campaign to insert herself into my business and my success. She started attending industry events where she knew I'd be speaking, introducing herself to potential clients as my sister and business partner. She began posting on social media about supporting family businesses and the power of collaboration, subtly implying that she was involved in my company's success. Most damaging, she started talking to our parents about her plans to work with me, framing it as a generous gesture to help heal our family relationships. Diana is being so mature about wanting to support Catherine's career, Mom told me during one of our infrequent phone calls. She's really grown up a lot, and I think working together could be wonderful for both of you. Diana and I haven't discussed her working for my company, I said firmly. Well, she mentioned that you were considering it. She's so excited about the possibility of combining her interpersonal skills with your analytical abilities. It could be a perfect partnership. Perfect partnership. Diana had convinced our parents that she was offering me a gift by wanting to join the company I'd built from nothing, using skills she'd never demonstrated, in an industry she didn't understand. It was time to end this particular delusion before it grew any further. But instead of confronting Diana directly, I decided to let her dig her own grave a little deeper first. Because I was about to reveal something that would make all of her maneuvering irrelevant. The call came on a Tuesday morning in September 2023, while I was reviewing client portfolios in my corner office on the 32nd floor of a midtown Manhattan skyscraper. My company, Mitchell Wealth Strategies, now occupied an entire floor, employed 23 people, and managed strategies for clients with a combined net worth exceeding $1 billion. Ms. Mitchell? This is Harold Whitman from Whitman, Sterling and Associates. I recognized the name immediately, one of the most prestigious estate planning law firms in Connecticut, the same firm that had handled my family's legal affairs for decades. Yes, Mr. Whitman. How can I help you? I'm calling regarding the Mitchell family estate. There's been an unusual development that requires immediate attention. Would it be possible for you to come to Greenwich this afternoon? Your parents and sister will be meeting with us at 2 o'clock. My heart rate increased, but my voice remained steady. What kind of development? I think it would be better to discuss this in person, Ms. Mitchell. There are documents that need to be reviewed, and frankly, the situation is quite complex. I agreed to the meeting, cancelled my afternoon appointments, and drove to Greenwich with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Whatever was happening, it was significant enough to require an emergency family meeting with estate planning attorneys. The Whitman, Sterling and Associates office occupied a restored colonial mansion on Greenwich Avenue, all mahogany paneling and oriental rugs designed to project old money discretion. I arrived at 1:45 p.m. and was shown to a conference room where my parents and Diana were already seated around a polished table that could have accommodated 12 people. The atmosphere was tense. Dad looked older than I'd seen him in years, his usually perfect posture slightly slumped. Mom's face was pinched with worry, and she kept smoothing her hair in a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. Diana looked confused and slightly petulant, like someone who'd been called to the principal's office without understanding why. Catherine, thank you for coming, Harold Whitman said as he entered the room. He was a tall, dignified man in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to delivering serious news to serious people. I know this was short notice, but circumstances require immediate attention. He placed a thick folder on the table and sat down across from us. Yesterday, our firm received a formal notification that has significant implications for the Mitchell family estate planning. It appears that several key assets, including controlling interest in Mitchell and Associates, have already been transferred to legal entities that are not part of your current estate structure. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the antique clock on the mantelpiece ticking. I don't understand, Dad said slowly. All of our assets are accounted for in our current will and trust structure. That's what we believed as well, Mr. Mitchell. However, it appears that certain transfers were made several years ago that complicate the current situation. Harold opened the folder and removed a stack of documents. In 2019, controlling interest in Mitchell and Associates was transferred to a Delaware LLC called Greenwich Holdings. The transfer was structured as a management reorganization for tax purposes, but the legal ownership has been fundamentally altered. Who controls Greenwich Holdings? Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harold looked directly at me. Catherine Mitchell is the sole beneficiary and controlling member. The explosion of voices was immediate and chaotic. Diana shrieked something about lawyers and challenges. Dad demanded to know how this was possible. Mom just sat in stunned silence, staring at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head. Let me explain the timeline, Harold said, raising his voice to restore order. In 2019, Mitchell and Associates was indeed facing some complex tax situations related to the business valuation and estate planning implications. The company's accounting firm recommended a restructuring that would optimize tax efficiency while maintaining operational control. He pulled out another document. Mr. Mitchell signed the transfer documents in December 2019, believing he was implementing a standard corporate reorganization. The paperwork was handled by Morrison, Klein and Associates, the law firm where Catherine was working at the time. The room fell silent again as everyone processed the implications. In December 2019, I'd been working at the firm that structured my father's business reorganization. December 2019 was also when my family was in the process of rewriting their will to essentially disinherit me in favor of Diana. The irony, Harold continued, is that while your family was restructuring the estate to exclude Catherine from significant inheritance, the business restructuring had already made her the effective owner of the primary family asset. This has to be illegal, Diana said, her voice shrill with panic. She manipulated Dad into signing documents he didn't understand. She used her position to steal from our family. Actually, Harold said mildly, every document was properly executed, fully disclosed, and legally sound. The restructuring was recommended by Mitchell and Associates' own accounting firm and implemented by one of New York's most reputable law firms. Catherine's role was limited to reviewing the legal documentation, which, I should note, she was ethically required to do as an associate at the implementing firm. But I didn't know what I was signing. Dad protested. Mr. Mitchell, you were provided with comprehensive explanations of every document. Your signatures were notarized, witnessed, and accompanied by legal certifications that you understood the implications of each transfer. Harold pulled out more paperwork. In fact, the documentation shows that you specifically requested this restructuring after consultation with your financial advisors, who recommended it as an optimal strategy for reducing estate tax exposure while maintaining operational control of the business. I watched my family's faces as they realized what had happened. They'd been so focused on punishing me through the inheritance that they'd completely forgotten about the business restructuring they'd implemented 2 years earlier. In their eagerness to give Diana control of the family wealth, they'd overlooked the fact that the most valuable asset had already been transferred to me through a perfectly legal corporate reorganization. How much is the business worth now? Mom asked quietly. Harold consulted another document. Based on recent valuations, Mitchell and Associates is worth approximately $18 million. Greenwich Holdings also includes several related assets and investment accounts, bringing the total value to approximately $22 million. $22 million. More than half of my family's total wealth, legally transferred to me while they were plotting to leave me $50,000 a year. There has to be something we can do, Diana said desperately. Some kind of legal challenge, some way to prove she manipulated the system. Miss Mitchell, Harold interrupted, your sister didn't manipulate anything. She reviewed legal documents as part of her professional responsibilities, exactly as she was required to do. The business restructuring was recommended by independent advisors and implemented through proper legal channels. Every document was properly executed and fully disclosed. But she knew what it meant. Diana's voice was rising toward hysteria. She knew she was inheriting the business while we were changing our will. Actually, I said, speaking for the first time since entering the room, I had no idea. Everyone turned to look at me. I'd been silent throughout Harold's presentation, watching my family's world reshape itself around the reality of their situation. I reviewed the legal documentation for the corporate restructuring as part of my job at Morrison, Klein, I continued. But I wasn't involved in the strategic planning, and I wasn't informed about the ultimate beneficiary structure. I didn't learn that I was the controlling member of Greenwich Holdings until I received Harold's call this morning. This was technically true. While I'd suspected that the restructuring might have implications for my inheritance, I hadn't known the specific details until Harold's call. I'd been too focused on building my own company to investigate the legal complexities of my father's business structure. You didn't know? Dad asked, his voice full of skepticism. I knew you were restructuring the business for tax purposes. I reviewed the legal documents to ensure they complied with corporate law. But the beneficiary designations and trust structures were handled by the estate planning division, which I wasn't part of. It was a perfect example of how legal specialization created knowledge silos. I'd handled the corporate compliance aspects of the restructuring, but the estate planning implications had been managed by different attorneys with different expertise. So you're telling me, Diana said slowly, that while we were rewriting our will to punish Catherine for being jealous, we accidentally gave her the most valuable part of our estate? That's an accurate summary, Harold confirmed. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of irony. My family had spent years convincing themselves that I was jealous of Diana's position, that I resented their financial support of her dreams, that I was bitter about being the responsible daughter while she was the beloved one. In reality, while they were planning to leave me a modest allowance and give Diana control of the family fortune, the legal system had already made me wealthier than all of them combined. What does this mean for our current estate planning? Mom asked. Well, Harold said carefully, it means that the majority of your estate has already been distributed. The revised will still governs the remaining assets, the real estate holdings, investment accounts, and personal property, but the business that represented your primary wealth has already been transferred. How much is left? Dad asked. Approximately $13 million in remaining assets. Diana would still inherit $13 million, more than most people could spend in a lifetime. But it was a far cry from the $35 million inheritance she'd been expecting. What about Catherine's inheritance in the current will? Diana asked desperately. The $50,000 a year trust? That remains in effect, Harold said. Catherine will still receive the annual payments outlined in your revised estate planning, in addition to her ownership of Greenwich Holdings. I almost smiled at the absurdity. They'd tried to give me an allowance while giving Diana an empire. Instead, they'd given me an empire while giving Diana an allowance, albeit a very generous one. This is insane, Diana said, standing up from the table. This whole thing is insane. Catherine doesn't deserve to inherit the business. She doesn't even care about family legacy. Actually, I said quietly, I care very much about family legacy. That's why I've spent the last 3 years building something that will honor the Mitchell name in ways you can't imagine. For the first time since entering the room, I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder of my own. Since we're all here, and since we're discussing family assets, I thought you might be interested to know what I've been doing with my life while you were rewriting your will. I placed several documents on the table: financial statements, client testimonials, media coverage, and industry awards. Mitchell Wealth Strategies now manages investment strategies for clients with a combined net worth of $1.2 billion. We employ 23 people, have offices in New York and Boston, and have been recognized as one of the fastest growing firms in our industry. I could see my father's mind working as he reviewed the financial statements, calculating the implications of the numbers in front of him. Last year, my company generated $4 million in revenue and $1.8 million in profit. This year, we're on track to exceed $6 million in revenue. Your company? Mom asked faintly. The company I built from nothing while you were deciding I didn't deserve to inherit the family business because I was too jealous to appreciate Diana's contributions to our legacy. I pulled out more documents. I've also established the Mitchell Family Foundation, which provides educational grants to first-generation college students and funding for financial literacy programs in underserved communities. Last year, we distributed $800,000 in grants. Diana had gone very pale. You named your foundation after our family? I named it after my family, Diana. The family that taught me the value of hard work, personal responsibility, and building something meaningful. The family that inspired me to create a legacy worthy of the Mitchell name. I turned to my father. Dad, you spent 30 years building Mitchell and Associates from a small accounting firm into a respected financial consulting company. I've spent 3 years building Mitchell Wealth Strategies into a firm that manages more than 50 times the assets your company oversees. The numbers were devastating in their clarity. Dad's company, which he'd built over 3 decades, managed approximately $20 million in client assets. My company, built in 3 years, managed 60 times that amount. I've honored everything you taught me about excellence, integrity, and service to clients. The only difference is that I've done it at a scale you never imagined possible. I gathered my documents and stood up from the table. So when Diana talks about family legacy and the responsibility that comes with inherited wealth, she's talking about managing assets that I've already surpassed through my own work. Catherine, wait, Mom said, reaching toward me. We need to talk about all of this. We need to figure out how to move forward as a family. We are moving forward, Mom. You're going to leave Diana $13 million, which will make her incredibly wealthy by any reasonable standard. She'll be free to pursue whatever dreams she's passionate about this week, with more financial security than 99% of the population. I paused at the door of the conference room. And I'm going to continue building something that honors the Mitchell name through achievement rather than inheritance, through merit rather than manipulation, through creating value rather than redistributing it. Where are you going? Diana asked, her voice small and defeated. Back to work. I have a conference call with 3 potential clients at 4 o'clock, and I never miss meetings with people who are trusting me with their life's work. As I walked out of the conference room, I heard Diana's voice behind me. This isn't over, Catherine. There has to be something we can do about this. But Harold's response followed me into the hallway. Miss Mitchell, this is completely over. The transfers were legal, properly executed, and irrevocable. Catherine owns Greenwich Holdings absolutely, and there are no grounds for any legal challenge. I drove back to Manhattan with the windows down, letting the September air clear my head of the toxic atmosphere I'd just left behind. For 3 years, I'd built my company believing that I was creating something separate from my family, something that would prove my worth independent of their approval or inheritance. Instead, I discovered that while they were plotting to exclude me from their legacy, the legal system had already made me the primary inheritor of everything they'd built. But the real victory wasn't the money, although $22 million certainly provided a satisfying sense of vindication. The real victory was that I'd proven myself capable of building something larger than what I'd inherited. I'd taken my family's name and elevated it to a level of respect and influence they'd never achieved. Diana had spent years convincing our parents that I was jealous of her position in the family. She'd been absolutely wrong about my jealousy, but absolutely right about one thing. I'd never been satisfied with being just another member of the Mitchell family. I'd always wanted to be the Mitchell who redefined what that name meant. And now, legally and professionally, I was. 3 weeks later, Diana called me. Catherine, I think we should meet. Just the 2 of us. There are things we need to discuss. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in Greenwich, neutral territory where our conversation wouldn't be interrupted by our parents' emotional reactions to our new reality. Diana looked different when she walked into the coffee shop. Gone was the effortless confidence I'd grown accustomed to seeing. She looked tired, uncertain, almost fragile in a way that seemed genuine rather than performed. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sitting down across from me with a cup of coffee she clearly didn't want. "I know things have been complicated lately." That's one way to put it. "Catherine, I owe you an apology. Not just for the last few weeks, but for years of behavior that I'm finally starting to understand was unfair to you." I waited for her to continue, curious about where this conversation was heading. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened in that lawyer's office, and I keep coming back to the same realization. While I was convincing Mom and Dad that you were jealous of me, you were building something incredible that put all of our family's achievements to shame." Diana took a sip of her coffee and made a face. "I spent so much energy trying to protect my position as the favorite daughter that I never stopped to consider what that position actually meant. I was the favorite because I was helpless, because I needed constant support, because I made Mom and Dad feel important by depending on them." "Diana. Let me finish, please. You were never jealous of me, Catherine. You were frustrated with me, and I couldn't tell the difference. You were frustrated that I was wasting opportunities you would have used brilliantly. You were frustrated that Mom and Dad were enabling behavior that wasn't helping me grow. You were frustrated that I was taking credit for being loved when what I was actually doing was demanding to be rescued." I was genuinely surprised by her insight. This level of self-reflection was something I'd never seen from Diana before. "The worst part," she continued, "is that somewhere deep down, I think I always knew you were right about me. I knew I wasn't building anything meaningful, wasn't contributing anything valuable, wasn't becoming someone worthy of the position I held in our family. And instead of using that knowledge to change, I used it to attack you for pointing it out. Why are you telling me this now?" Diana smiled sadly. "Because losing that inheritance was the best thing that ever happened to me." I raised an eyebrow. For the first time in my life, I had to face the reality of who I actually am versus who I've been pretending to be. "I'm 26 years old, Catherine. I have no real skills, no meaningful accomplishments, no idea how to support myself. I've been coasting on charm and family money for so long that I forgot those weren't sustainable life strategies. You're still inheriting $13 million, Diana. That's hardly destitution." "I know. But it's not enough to fund the lifestyle I was planning to live forever. And more importantly, it's not enough to fund the person I was planning to never become." She leaned forward, and for the first time in years, I saw something resembling genuine vulnerability in her expression. "I want to be someone worthy of your respect, Catherine. I want to build something meaningful with my life. I want to be the kind of person who deserves to inherit wealth rather than someone who just expects it." "What are you thinking of doing?" "I don't know yet. But I want to start by learning about the business that I almost inherited. I want to understand what Dad built, what you've built, what it takes to create something valuable rather than just consume it." Diana paused, clearly struggling with what she wanted to say next. "I know I have no right to ask this, and I know you have every reason to say no, but would you consider letting me work for your company? Not in some senior role that I haven't earned, but in whatever capacity would actually be helpful? I want to learn how to work, Catherine. I want to learn how to contribute something meaningful." The request hung in the air between us. 6 months earlier, Diana had approached me about joining my company as a partner, assuming her interpersonal skills and family connection qualified her for a senior position. Now she was asking to work for me in whatever capacity I deemed appropriate. "What makes you think you'd be good at financial services?" I asked. "I don't think I'd be good at it initially. But I think I could learn to be good at it if I had the right teacher and if I was willing to start at the bottom." "Diana, you've never held a real job. You've never finished a significant project. You've never demonstrated any aptitude for business or finance. Why would I risk my company's reputation by hiring someone with no relevant experience?" "Because," she said quietly, "you're the only person who's ever held me accountable for my choices, and accountability is exactly what I need to become someone worth respecting." It was a compelling answer, and I found myself genuinely considering the possibility. Diana had been my antagonist for so long that I'd never considered whether she might be capable of transformation. If I were to consider this, and I'm not saying I am, what would you expect in terms of compensation and responsibilities? Whatever you think is appropriate. I'm not negotiating from a position of strength here, Catherine. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be someone different than who I've been. And if you decide after 6 months that the work is too hard or too boring or not aligned with your creative vision, then I'll have learned something valuable about myself, and you'll have learned that your instincts about me were correct. I studied my sister's face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. But for the first time in our adult lives, Diana seemed completely genuine, vulnerable, uncertain, but determined to change her trajectory. I'll think about it, I said finally. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. As we left the coffee shop, Diana turned to me one more time. Catherine, I know I can't undo years of being terrible to you. But I want you to know that seeing what you've built has made me realize that you were never the problem in our family. I was. And I'm going to spend however long it takes to become someone worthy of being your sister. 6 months later, Diana started work at Mitchell Wealth Strategies as a junior associate in our client services department. She was making $45,000 a year, less than she'd typically spent on clothes in a good month, and working longer hours than she'd ever worked in her life. But for the first time since I'd known her, Diana seemed genuinely happy. She was learning, contributing, building something meaningful with her days. She was still charming and beautiful, but now those qualities were backed by competence and work ethic. The Mitchell family dynamics had shifted permanently. I was no longer the jealous sister who couldn't appreciate Diana's gifts. I was the successful sister who'd given Diana an opportunity to discover her own potential. Diana was no longer the entitled princess who expected everything to be handed to her. She was a junior employee learning to earn respect through performance. And our parents had learned that love and money were not the same thing, that inheritance and achievement were different forms of legacy, and that the daughter they'd underestimated had surpassed their wildest dreams while the daughter they'd favored had needed to start over from scratch. 3 years after that devastating meeting in Harold Whitman's conference room, I stood in the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in New York City, accepting an award for Outstanding Achievement in Wealth Management from the International Association of Financial Planners. In the audience, I could see my entire family, Dad, proud and amazed at what I'd built, Mom, finally understanding that accomplishment was its own form of love, and Diana, applauding enthusiastically for the sister she'd once tried to destroy and now worked to support. During my acceptance speech, I thanked my family for teaching me the most valuable lesson of my career, that true wealth isn't what you inherit, but what you build. That real power isn't what others give you, but what you create for yourself. And that the best revenge isn't destroying those who doubt you, but becoming so successful that their doubt becomes irrelevant. The Mitchell name, I said, looking directly at my family in the audience, will be remembered not for what was passed down, but for what was built up. Not for what was inherited, but for what was earned. Not for what was given, but for what was achieved. As I held the crystal award above my head, I thought about that conversation in Harold Whitman's office when Diana had asked if there was anything she could do to challenge my inheritance. She'd been absolutely right that it wasn't over. But she'd been completely wrong about who would emerge victorious. I'd let them see who signed the inheritance papers, all right. But more importantly, I'd shown them who rewrote the meaning of inheritance entirely. And that signature, my signature, was now worth far more than any document they'd ever planned to leave me. 5 years have passed since the transformative meeting in Harold Whitman's conference room, and the Mitchell family story has become something none of us could have predicted. What began as a tale of sibling rivalry and parental favoritism evolved into a narrative of redemption, growth, and the true meaning of legacy. Diana has become one of my most valuable employees, earning promotions based entirely on merit and developing expertise in client relationship management that genuinely impresses our industry peers. She recently completed her MBA at night school, something she initiated and funded herself, and has begun specializing in financial planning for women entrepreneurs. Last month, she closed her first major independent deal, a comprehensive wealth management strategy for a tech startup founder worth $45 million. When she called me to share the news, I heard something in her voice I'd never heard before, genuine pride in an accomplishment she'd earned entirely through her own efforts. Our parents have also undergone their own transformation. Dad, now fully retired, spends his time mentoring young entrepreneurs through the Mitchell Family Foundation. Mom has become the foundation's volunteer coordinator, using her organizational skills to expand our educational programs into underserved communities. As for me, Mitchell Wealth Strategies has grown beyond my wildest ambitions. We now manage investment strategies for clients with a combined net worth exceeding $2 billion, employ 47 people across offices in New York, Boston, and Los Angeles, and have been recognized as one of the most innovative firms in our industry. The Mitchell name, once associated with family dysfunction and favoritism, now represents excellence in financial stewardship and social responsibility. We've created a legacy that extends far beyond our family's personal wealth, touching thousands of lives. Sometimes I think about that Thanksgiving dinner in 2019 when Diana first accused me of jealousy, and I marvel at how wrong we all were about everything. She thought I was jealous of her position in the family. I thought she was irredeemably shallow and manipulative. Our parents thought love meant protection from consequences. I thought achievement meant nothing without recognition. We were all partially right and completely wrong. The truth, as it often does, lay somewhere in the complex middle ground between our competing narratives. The real revelation was that families, like businesses, are systems that can be restructured, improved, and optimized when everyone commits to honest evaluation and genuine change. The inheritance papers that started this journey were ultimately just paperwork. The real inheritance was the relationships we rebuilt through accountability, respect, and shared commitment to something larger than our individual interests. Today, when I sign documents as the CEO of Mitchell Wealth Strategies, I'm not just signing my name, I'm signing a commitment to the values that should have defined our family from the beginning: merit over manipulation, achievement over entitlement, and contribution over consumption. The Mitchell legacy is no longer about what we inherited from previous generations, but about what we're building for future ones. And that signature, that representation of everything we've learned and everything we've become, is worth more than any inheritance could ever be.